Sir Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner launched Labour's local election campaign today with the promise of national renewal.
Make no mistake, Labour has a plan to get Britain's future back, a plan to drag politics in this country back to service, tilt our economy back towards the interests of working people, get us building again, working again, growing again, by unlocking the pride and potential of communities like Dudley.
Starmer accused the Conservatives of preying on the hopes of working people by making big promises on levelling up and then failing to deliver.
He also called out Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for failing to call a general election and accused him of running scared.
Look, I do have to be honest. I was hoping we'd be launching a different election campaign here today, but the Prime Minister bottled it. He wants one last drawn-out summer tour with his beloved helicopter. So we need to send him another message. Show his party once again that their time is up. The dithering must stop. The date must be set. Britain wants change, and it's time for change with Labour.
That's fabulous.
Now, John, I love the fact that he starts speaking like fabulous, fabulous. What's happened to you, Kev? Anyway, joining us in the studio is Matthew Laza. We converted him.
I've converted him, yes, you haven't.
Part of this. Former Labour advisor, Matthew
I'm not referring to
Laza.
myself in the royal we. I just want to make that clear. We're not quite there yet.
Now, one of the things that Sir Keir Starmer has said about this whole levelling up, and it's been a bit of a Labour strategy before, is this idea of devolving powers back to local leaders. And I'm there thinking, oh, yeah, the NHS is thriving in Labour-run Wales. And, oh, Birmingham City Council putting up their council tax by 21% because they're, £500 million in debt. They really need more power, that lot. I mean, how's that going to help?
Well, look, the local authorities across the country are in crisis because of basically a decade and a half of austerity. And yes, Birmingham is in a mess, which is run by Labour, but Thurrock, which is run by the Tories, is in a mess. It's a cross-party thing.
But then the
and there are good councils and there are bad councils run by all different parties.
These people need more power, and that's how we're going to level up.
Well,
Make that make sense.
Because what we've seen is people like Andy Burnham in Manchester have made a real difference. Just this week, Andy had the second phase of bringing the buses back under local authority control, not run by the local authority, franchise. So, like in London, it's good enough for us in London. It's good enough for the people of Manchester.
Talk about that for years to come,
TfL's a success story, isn't it?
Won't they? But I mean, look, this is levelling up. OK, I think it's politically ridiculous because all you're doing is making a bed that is going to be hard to lie on. You say, we're going to level up the country. The Tories said that. Guess what? Everyone's saying you didn't. Now, why Keir Starmer wants to nick that policy, I don't know. But this is what he seems to do. He said, well, I can't think of any new policies, so we're going to do levelling up as well. Only we'll do it better. Rishi can't solve the migrant crisis, but we'll solve the migrant crisis better. I mean, can't he come up with something a bit better? And
he doesn't make the crisis he's got to solve.
Yeah, but the levelling up is not a crisis.
No, on the migrant thing, it's clearly an issue that voters care about. It's an issue that is affecting the country, and we need a solution. And the Tories have failed on it, so Labour has its plan, which we've discussed on this around this table.
What is that plan again?
It's not because it involves it's smashing the gangs.
We need more devolution. We need
we don't
less
to stop the migrant
devolution.
gangs. No, we look on levelling up. I rather agree with you. I hate it as a phrase because I think it's quite patronising to people from outside London. I'm from the northwest. I'm from Manchester, and it's also quite difficult for people in the more prosperous parts of the country because it sort of makes you one. I don't believe in making everybody the same, but I do believe in investing in local communities. And I think what was interesting about what he's saying today is it's about doing things that are specific. Where, some places need the high street sorting, other places don't because the high street's thriving. It depends in a few places, it depends what town you go to. Tourist towns, for example. So if you're in the north and you're in York, your high street's thriving. If you're in Sunderland, your high street's not doing so well. The north isn't one great entity, and that's why I think it's important that local leaders do it. So I don't like it as a phrase. I think it's clever politics to nick the phrase. I suspect that it might be dumped as a phrase by Labour government, and it might be like regional.
It would be wise to dump it because
Northern Powerhouse is a better phrase. At least that had a bit of oomph about it. Levelling up just sounds
fairly soon, just like the Tories, people will say to Keir, you said you were going to level up and you haven't.
You can certainly do things in the north.
Because
You
you're
can
never
make
going to
everybody the
make
same.
Sunderland the same as Knightsbridge.
No,
are you?
absolutely, which
It's
is why I don't
stupid,
like it as a
asinine
phrase.
policy.
Today, he's kind of making clear that it's quite clever politics to say, you know, we agree with what they've done as a principle. I don't like the phrase. We didn't make the phrase up. They did. So hopefully we can find better language over time. But the point about investing...
Levelling down, how about that?
Well, that's what that's what the Blue Wall are worried about, and why the Lib Dems in places like Surrey and Oxfordshire are doing so well. Because I think there's a fear there that it's like, OK, we're doing well, but we don't need to be pushed down. So that's why I actually think it's a bad political phrase for the Tories, who thought it was so clever. And actually, it's backfired slightly.
I mean, interesting, when you look at the Red Wall, which, of course, was won by Boris Johnson by and large in 2019, all the polling there is showing that Reform UK are polling higher than the Conservatives in that area. The Conservatives' argument would be, well, great, that is essentially gifting those seats to Sir Keir Starmer. But do you think the Labour Party have anything to worry about as time ticks on of maintaining support in those areas if they can't deliver what Boris Johnson would call the red meat to the Red Wall?
Well, I think what might be quite interesting, and depending how much the Tories implode at the election, how few seats they get, how big the civil war, which has already started, is, I think what you might see is a big challenge for Labour in government from Reform, because in those seats, Reform will be the big challenger. I mean, we've got the Blackpool South by-election. Now the MPs resign, that's going to be called, and therefore in Blackpool South it's quite possible Reform will come second. I think Labour will win and win quite well, but you know, Reform might come second, and therefore it leaves them in that kind of pole position in some of the Red Wall seats for the election after this, particularly if Labour isn't seen to be tough enough on some of the things. When Labour gets torn between its metropolitan base and the Red Wall in government, you know, on everything from trans to to Europe, then there could be some tension there. So I think Reform and the Greens, who everybody forgets about the Greens, 7-8%, who could be quite a problem. Remember how the Lib Dems were a problem for Labour in power last time, especially around the Iraq War, 2005 election. They were a real threat. I think you could see those two, quote, smaller parties in the end being a big headache for Labour when it's in power, even if in the short term it benefits by taking some Tory votes. Because there's certainly Labour votes in the Reform vote. Every time where I go, people say, I see you on the telly, I used to vote Labour, but I vote Reform in certain parts of the country. So yeah, that could be an issue.
Interesting.
What about Angela Rayner, the Greater Manchester Police, saying they're reassessing their decision not to investigate her over this alleged dubious activity involving her council house that she bought up there? She's accused of avoiding capital gains tax by pretending that she was living there when she wasn't. Now, the police did say nothing to see here. They've now changed their minds. This could be a bit of a headache, couldn't it? Because she could be found... I mean, she denies any wrongdoing, of course, but if she's found to be a barefaced liar who's broken the law, that's going to be a massive problem for Labour.
That would be a massive problem. Look, I think what's happened with this is, so she has sent all her documents, the tax returns and all the kind of dates and everything, through to the powers that be at the Labour Party, who of course are currently led by Sue Gray, who is Miss Integrity from the Boris Johnson inquiries, but also she had a decade before that, whenever you think about that particular inquiry, as head of ethics in the Cabinet Office. And my understanding from people in Keir's office is that Sue has been through line by line. She's a details person and she's satisfied with the answers Angela has given. So Angela needs to give all the answers to the questions the police ask. And I hope and believe that she will, in the end, that they won't pursue it. But, you know, if they're having another look at it, I think it seemed to be a bit strange that they decided they weren't going to look at it within about 2 days. If I was the police, I'd have just calmed down, had a look at it and then made a decision. Obviously, if she has been found to be in the wrong, then that will be a political problem. But it looks like I think she's going to be okay.
Well, you might think so, but let's wait and find out what the police discover, shall we?
Yeah, but with them, the police looked into Keir in Durham and the Curry Gate, as it was called, and ultimately was totally cleared. So don't panic, as they said in Dad's Army.
Matthew, it's fantastic having you in the studio.
Thank you, Matthew.
Seeing you
Always
again.
a pleasure, mate.